Earth.
It's the most important day in Australia, a day to bring people together to say thanks to those who served and to those who currently serve, to remember their sacrifice and to pause to reflect on those who gave their life in the service of the nation. As always, the City of Perth parade and commemorative service is an integral part of this hallowed day. Good morning, wherever you are watching from. Clint Wilden with you in commentary. The weather for today, cool but clear, perfect for those marching and for those who are watching on along the parade route. More than 100,000 people are expected to attend RSL WA hosted commemorative events throughout the city today. And today, of course, a day with special significance. It's the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. For the first time this morning, the commemorative service after the march will be held at the Perth Concert Hall, commencing at 11 a.m. We'll bring you the entire service program as we pause to remember and reflect on those who gave their life in the service of their nation. Those marching today are shortly about to start making their way past the presenting dais over the next hour and a half. And of course, a reminder, if you're watching for the first time, people marching with medals on their right breast, that means they're wearing them in honour of a member of their family. It's terrific, as always, to see so many members of families who have served marching today. We're welcome to you, wherever you're watching from. I'm fortunate enough to have two people alongside me to help guide us through the stories of the veterans we're shortly to see marching. Firstly, delighted again to be joined in commentary by Wayne Gardner, a military historian from the Army Museum in Fremantle. Lovely to see you again, Wayne.
Yeah, good morning, Clint. A real privilege to be here again with you to commemorate such an important day. And today is a special one. Of course, this is the last year of the centenary commemorations, which commenced in 2014 to honour the 1914 people that went away. And of course, this year culminates in the year of victory, 1918, when the war was won by the Allies and resulted, of course, on the 11th of November in the Armistice, or Remembrance Day, as we call it today. And there were major battles such as Villers-Bretonneux that occurred, and in fact they occurred on the 24th, 25th of April 1918, the third anniversary of ANZAC Day, and the Battle of Hamel before the 8th of August offensive, which culminated in the end of the First War.
Magnificent day, and great to see the crowds turning up in big numbers, as you would expect here for the Perth Parade and Commemorative Service. And very special guest joining us for the first time on our ANZAC Day Parade coverage. It's a big welcome to Steve Danaher, military historian from the Military Historical Society of Australia. Welcome to you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Clint. And just to finish off on what Wayne's had to say, was that the First World War was considered the war to end all wars. But unfortunately, history paints a different picture for us.
We'll tell a number of those stories throughout the day. And of course, it is a big day on ABC television. At midday, we'll take you to the dawn service from Gallipoli. And then at 1, we'll head to Villers-Bretonneux Memorial in France. There's also, of course, a special edition of ABC News with James McHale at 7 o'clock. And of course, after the march, as you can see, we'll take you to the commemorative service, the entire service to be brought to you here on ABC television, featuring the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band and an 80-strong choir as well from the Perth Concert Hall. Now, as we always do, let's hear from the 26th Governor-General of Australia, His Excellency, the Honourable General Sir Peter Cosgrove, the former Defence Chief of the nation, with his 4th ANZAC Day address.
What does ANZAC Day mean to you? For many, it comes down to sticking by your mates and courage and camaraderie. Many of us hold that it shines a light on our national identity, our sense of self, a past statement of who we are and what we stand for. Of course, it is fundamentally about war and loss and grief, of sacrifice, and hopefully about a determination to avoid conflict wherever possible. Whatever this day means to each of us, it is above all about remembering and paying our respects. Our respects to those men and women who have served in the past and those who continue to serve in our name, under our flag. This is their day, and it is our day to show them the respect they so richly deserve. You know, at the outbreak of the First World War, recruitment marches, known as snowball marches, were held across the countryside. Young men would join these marches under banners with names like the Cooeys, the Dungarees and the Cane Beetles. They volunteered and signed up to do their bit, to become diggers. Some of these marches came right past where this memorial now stands in Bathurst. Within months, these young men and thousands more would set sail for foreign lands and battlefields whose names still haunt us. Gallipoli, Fromelles, Pozieres, Passchendaele and Bullecourt. And now here and in virtually every country town and city stands a proud memorial inscribed with the names of those who sadly did not make it back home. Men like Sergeant Fred Clark, killed by machine gun fire at just 24, after fighting on the Western Front for 3 years, remembered by his mother as a brave young life which promised well. And Rob Pittendra, a young Methodist minister who served as a stretcher bearer on the front line at Gallipoli. Although well aware of the dangers, he would crawl out into no man's land to tend to the wounded and dying, crying out for help. Eventually, perhaps inevitably, he was shot by sniper fire. He somehow made it back to the trenches, but his injuries were too great. Rob passed away on a hospital ship. He was buried at sea. I've also had the chance to meet the families of 3 of the nurses who died after their ship, the SS Vinebrook, was bombed during the evacuation of Singapore in February 1942. One, Sister Mary Clark, was last seen floating away on a piece of debris. Her mother had to wait until the return of survivors in 1945 to learn of her daughter's fate. The other nurses, matron Irene Drummond and Sister Bessie Wilmot, were 2 of 21 nurses massacred at Banker Island after the ship went down. Both families knew nothing of their fate until the one survivor, Vivian Bullwinkle, came home with the terrible news at the end of the war. It's stories like these we think of on ANZAC Day, stories of selfless sacrifice, of duty, of service to country. On this day of respect, we remember the toll conflict takes on those who serve and the sacrifices made by so many country towns, so many families, so many loved ones. We'll always be there to support those from across this land, from across generations, who stand in harm's way for our nation. Their deeds inspire us and are part of us. We are together as one.
Fine words there from the 26th Governor-General of Australia, the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove. I've been to that park in Bathurst. It's a remarkably sombre park, a beautiful park as well, but right throughout WA you've got similar memorials, and of course up on Kings Park, a beautiful memorial as well to those that have served and those who lost their lives. And again, it is a day to reflect on what that means to all of us, Wayne.
Absolutely. I think the way that the Brigadier Peter Moore, the new commander in 13 Brigade, spoke at the dawn service today reflected all that, and the values that come out of our Gallipoli experience, creating what anyone interprets the spirit of ANZAC to be, and how it can be translated into our own civilian lives and how we conduct our lives in the community as well. Very important. And so the memorials that we see throughout our own state, let alone throughout Australasia, are outstanding reminders to that sacrifice and that commitment to country that we've come to expect really now.
Lovely to see young and old in the crowd to watch those about to march past. On a great diversity of faces that have come to pay their respects for those who have served. Plenty of action above us in the skies as well. There is a flyover expected from the RAAF very shortly. It's going to be another terrific march. And conditions, it's been, well, rainy at times in recent years. No problems at all today. It's cool but bright and sunny. Terrific conditions for the Perth ANZAC Day March. Now, we mentioned before, Wayne and Steve, a number of the anniversary commemorations for 2018. The biggest one, of course, the year of victory for 1918, the end of the First World War. But there's other anniversaries that are worth mentioning as well.
Well, all three services would certainly be commemorating various events and campaigns from the First War right through to current days. And the Royal Australian Navy this year is particularly focusing on the Battle of the Atlantic, which was a campaign which commenced in 1939 in September when the war began and concluded only when the war finished, similar to what the RAF did with Bomber Command, taking the war to the enemy. And of course the convoy system was so important to keep the flow of the goods to the United Kingdom from North America. And in the early days the convoy system was not working well, and the German U-boats sank many merchant ships earlier on, and to the state when the war had finished, the Allies had lost something like 3,500 merchant ships, and 175 Allied warships were sunk by the U-boats before Black May of 1943 came along, and the German submarines were now defeated to some extent, but the war continued in that important area. Interesting too, the Australian hospital ship Centaur, and I say interestingly but tragically, was sunk by a Japanese submarine without warning near Stradbroke Island off Queensland. And this was on the 14th of May 1943, and only 64 on board survived, with 323 being lost. So it was a clearly marked hospital ship and sunk on that tragic day. The HMAS Hobart in World War II was torpedoed off the New Hebrides. Didn't sink, but was eventually repaired by December 44, and they lost 13 officers and sailors, were killed and 7 wounded. So the Army, of course, have had a lot going on, and we talk about the end of the war, particularly on the Western Front, where the war was going to be won or lost. But also, not to forgetting the Light Horse, the Australian Light Horse in Palestine. The Battle of Ez Salt was fought in this period 100 years ago, and this is where A Squadron 10th Light Horse, the current Armoured Corps unit in Western Australia, gets its name for its barracks or lines, Ez Salt Lines. And Megiddo, this was the Great Northern Cavalry Drive from the 19th to the 21st of December, which was the major contribution to the Turkish forces capitulating on the 30th of October. So their war finished on the 30th of October, and on the Western Front, ours on the 11th of September.
Wayne, something that would be familiar through a number of movies, the completion of the Burma-Thai Railway is worth touching on as well.
Yes, a significant one, Clint. The Hellfire Pass, this was the railway cutting that was hand cut through the rocks by our Allied POWs. They were working 18-hour days. They were getting out in the dark, walking some kilometres to the railway, and then after that time coming back in the dark. The cutting was completed in 6 weeks, which would have been a major end if you had had proper tools and things, let alone the tools they had, which were incredibly primitive, and of course being knocked about and abused by the enemy during that period. But also the Thai-Burma Railway was finally completed, with the Burma and Thai link happening in late 1942 and joined in October 1943. So a terrible story of our prisoner of war experience, in fact what we call the prisoner of war nightmare. And then once the railway was finished, the POWs were often dispersed to overseas within the Pacific to other countries, including Japan, and many were lost on the ships travelling there, but that's another story for next year perhaps.
Tell us a little bit briefly, as we wait for the flyover, the RAAF.
Yes, the Royal Australian Air Force this year, we've got the Battle of the Bismarck Sea is their major action. This was in the Pacific. It was largely conducted by the US 5th Air Force. That included many Australian aircrew, which was interesting because at an urgent request from the US Air Force, they didn't have a number of crewmen.
Speaking of the Air Force.
Yes, well, there they are, right on time, and well done to the RAAF. And importantly, number 30 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, took a prominent part in the Battle of Bismarck Sea. These were the Beaufighters, which the Japanese called the Whispering Death. And this Air Force caught an important Japanese convoy coming to reinforce New Guinea near Lae. And the convoy was carrying something like 6,500 Japanese troops. And following the battle throughout the day, few ships survived, and only 1,200 Japanese managed to reach New Guinea, some 2,700 being rescued. And also, with 30 Squadron's role, it was also prominent because the famous Australian war correspondent Damien Parra, who had taken some very important images, particularly on the Kokoda track campaign.
Kokoda front line.
Yes, exactly. He was in one of the Beaufighters and took amazing footage from the pilot's seat virtually, and that lifted the importance of the Battle of Bismarck Sea, because it actually brought it to life through his fantastic images, 2nd to the 4th of March 1943.
So the march is underway here in Perth, the ANZAC Day March, and here we are leading the way. Tell us about who's in front and what this all means. Wayne Gardner, Steve Danaher.
Well, so what happens here now, we have our 3 senior commanders from all 3 services. To the left, you have the Royal Australian Navy, represented by Captain Brian Delamont, who's the commanding officer of HMAS Stirling. Senior service, so he's on the left, and we'll find later on the Navy will actually lead off as well. For the first time this year, we have Brigadier Peter Moore, the commander of 13 Brigade, who spoke so well at the dawn service this morning. And the Royal Australian Air Force Wing Commander Brett Mitchell, who's the commander of 25 Squadron at RAF Base Pearce. And they will take their place on the official saluting dais, which is just outside Council House, and take the salute of their various uniformed services as they come by.
Behind them you can see the WA Police mounted section. Always the tradition that the police grant the permission of the civil authority to the military to march through the city. The unit led by Senior Sergeant Glenn Potter, riding Police Horse Bluey. As you can see, the senior service, as they call them, behind them, the Royal Australian Navy. Plenty of Australian flags out, being waved vigorously along both sides of the terrace. Crowds 5 to 6 deep all the way down the terrace. It's a terrific sight. The weather has been kind to us as the ANZAC Day March of 2018 gets underway, and a pleasure to bring it to you here on ABC television.
It's always quite imposing following the march, and particularly from the sidelines, coming down the terrace. It's a wonderful aspect for people not only on site and looking at it live there, but those at home see it beautifully presented. They're paying respects to Her Excellency, the Governor of Western Australia, Kerry Sanderson AC. This will be her last ANZAC Day parade in Perth this year. She's finishing her tenure at the end of April and had done an absolutely wonderful job, and our first female Governor.
32nd Governor of WA, Kim Beazley, about to become the 33rd as well. As you can see, those marching all the way down the terrace. As I mentioned before, there's the WA Police mounted section. Bluey, Senior Sergeant Glenn Potter aboard, been in the police service since 2013. It's a unit that maintains 20 horses, is based in Maylands. The riders are all serving officers, and they carry upon their lances the WA State Pennant. It's the oldest continuous police unit in WA, almost 140 years old. They are a fully operational police unit as well, as they make their way past the saluting dais.
Yes, the horses always look superb and well, beautifully maintained, and very smartly turned out indeed.
We hear the first of the bands as well, just behind them. That's the Royal Australian Navy Band. WA detachment first formed in 1957. Originally the Naval Reserve Band of the Fremantle Port Division of the Naval Reserve.
And this year we have the contingents coming from HMAS Ballarat, HMAS Stewart, HMAS Bathurst and HMAS Stirling on parade today. Ballarat is commanded by Commander Paul Johnson.
Might just pause and have a little listen as they make their way past. And now we see the Navy, the senior service, in their crisp white uniforms making their way past the dais.
And indeed, we have Commander Chris Leese commanding HMAS Stewart, Lieutenant Commander Chris Emerson from HMAS Bathurst. Their campaign medals indicate current service, a lot of them involved with operations against piracy and also border security now, both around Australia and also in the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf regions.
This is something a little bit different this year, Wayne, in terms of it's the Governor herself just taking the salute here.
Yes, this is quite a big change, Clint. People would be aware that over the last decades, in fact, the Governor would stay on the VIP dais, of course, but also then the senior officer of that particular service would take the salute. And this year there has been that change, even though they're on the official dais.
A significant event happened at the end of last year. On the 20th December, in fact, it was the discovery of the submarine AE-1, which was lost off German New Guinea. It was lost in September 1914 and had remained missing for many, many years. And yeah, it's been quite satisfying that it's been located and with a complete loss of 35 crew at the time.
Yeah, that was a huge discovery, Steve. It's the last, really, of the Australian naval vessels which were lost either due to enemy action or through some tragic circumstance. And having it found just so recently is a wonderful breakthrough for the Navy and the Royal Australian Naval military history.
Yes, and of course the AE-2 was lost at Gallipoli as well. So we had two submarines in the First World War. Both were lost, and they were our most modern ships, which was, and there was they were technology advanced, and to lose them so early in the war was a blow to the RAN.
Yeah, keep in mind too, the AE-2 did some outstanding work though up in the Dardanelles area in the Sea of Marmora. It actually broke through the Dardanelles, which had defeated the Royal Navy previously, and got into the Sea of Marmora and did damage against Turkish shipping before finally being lost and the crew captured.
Wreck of the AE-2 located in June 1998, as you mentioned, Wayne. It was an incredible amount of work done by sailing through the Dardanelles and disrupting Turkish shipping. Made it large for 5 days after getting past minefields and land-based guns in the early hours of 25th of April 1915, and then eventually sustaining irreparable damage while under heavy fire. This is the Australian Army Band, Perth. Band's primary role to provide musical support for the military for ceremonial and training purposes and promote the image of the Australian Army to the wider community. Formed back in 1949, once a brass band, became a concert military band in 1972, and in 1993 transformed into a full-time regular Army band, tour Army Reserve Band, comprising of musicians from the Army Reserve. Let's have a little listen to them as they make their way past.
So we have 10th Light Horse, A Squadron 10th Light Horse on parade with their plumes, and also followed by the infantry units of 1128 Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Bob Colligan, and Regimental Sergeant Major Paul Dennett, CSM on parade today. So that was 13th Brigade Headquarters leading 10th Light Horse. They're commanded this year by Colonel Stephen Gaunt, who will lead their march. The 10th Light Horse Guidon party is on parade as well today with the bearer, War Officer Luke Wolfe, and also the escorts being Sergeant Ryan Gray and Sergeant Samuel Bovington. They have silver accoutrements, and also their leather bandoliers and belts are in black, distinctive from the other corps generally, which have brown and brass.
The famous slouch hat, of course, we saw a short time ago, and also with the emu plumes. Wow.
Yeah, the emu plumes are a tradition of the light horse from the days up in Queensland. That's where it first came from. These are 16 Battalion Royal West Australian Regiment here with us today. Lieutenant Colonel Campbell Waterman commanding, with RSM Wowan Carl Hemberg CSM on parade, and their colour party. B Company being the Cameron Company, carrying on the traditions of 16 Battalion Cameron Highlanders, which were formed in the late 1930s, just prior to World War II. And their colours bear testament to their former service at ANZAC, and also on the Western Front, covering battles such as the Bullecourt actions, Pozieres, Villers-Bretonneux, the Zines, and the list goes on, frankly, and into World War II with Crete and Greece and North Africa, El Alamein, and into the Pacific as well. 13 Combat Support Service Battalion is also marching this year under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Kim Parry. And they're the Combat Support Services units which can provide 7 Field Ambulance and 10 Transport Squadron and 13 Field Supply Company and 5th Dental Unit and 13 Field Workshops. The Regimental Sergeant Major is Wowan Matthew Fury. You can see the mixed badges on their hats, different corps, a Service Corps and Signals, Medical Corps badges there. And again, their service. These are reserve soldiers generally, and have also seen these days service overseas. So many years ago, decades ago, perhaps serving operationally was the domain of the permanent forces. But more so in recent years, the reserves have been committed to be involved in different parts of the world, in the Pacific with Bougainville and the Solomon Islands, and many also went into Iraq and Afghanistan.
This is the unmistakable sound and look of the Trinity College pipes and drums and the coastal Scottish pipe bands. Two bands combining, marching together for the ANZAC Parade, the Coastal Scottish Pipe Band. Oldest civilian band in WA, established in 1898. Trinity College Pipes and Drums formed in 1962.
Again, some of these bands clipped will be doing the rounds twice, as we've seen before, but there's not quite enough bands to go around, and so once they're further down the terrace, they then double back, out of sight, out of mind, and then reappear a bit later on at times, which keeps the whole parade going. And often the pipes and drums I've found in the past really good to march to. So we have the Royal Australian Air Force now completing the uniform services for this part of the parade. The Queen's colour for number 25 Squadron, City of Perth Squadron. The colour bearer is Flying Officer Samantha Sandwich Mitchell, and number 2 Flying Training School Governor General banner is Pilot Officer William Hoffman.
It's also significant to note that proud West Australian lady there, Jen Richards, who completes 35 years service in October. Jen is the Warrant Officer at RAF Base Richmond and the one and only WOD, Warrant Officer Discipline, in the RAAF as a female.
And one of my favourite parts of the parade every year, the working dogs, always a very popular part of the ANZAC Day Parade.
It's good to see them on parade again, and interesting enough, and Steve and I were chatting about this earlier on, just recently, the dogs in all 3 services have now been awarded their own campaign medals when they're away. They'll take the form of a rectangular medal, and it'll be worn on their coat, and when the dogs either leave service or pass it away in service, the medals are retained by the units. I'm not sure if the medals are named, but there'll be more information coming through on that in due course, I think, Steve.
You can actually see them there.
Airman Wolf? I'm not too sure.
It's fascinating just having a little look at the blanket over the dogs.
Some interesting service there with the medals we see with the RAAF, combination of, in some cases, RAF and then coming over to join the RAAF, and a vast range of campaigns the chaps and the ladies have served in.
you'll see some of in the berets there, the trainee pilots from Singapore. They are now trained up in Western Australia, and so it appears some of those people will be on parade as well today as well as the others. And so the beret people too are often the ground defence troops. So in the Air Force, it's not only air crew, but they have their ground defence people too.
This is the 7-wing Air Force Cadets Drum Corps. 2 groups of 35 marching today. It was a big group.
Gee, that's a big group, isn't it?
Yes, they will break up and become 2 separate bands. As you mentioned before, a number of the bands do make their way around twice. Some of these cadets are as young as 13. We can see some of the youngsters there. They only just completed the annual drum course. So yeah, allowed to come along and drum today as part of the ANZAC Day Parade.
Yeah, I see that. They do a very good job. And it's great to encouraging the younger people like we used to be in the cadet forces and the community service areas, getting involved quite young. And of course, it's part of their development as young people and getting involved with the community, which is wonderful to see. So the Air Force is commemorating a lot this year, and it's interesting enough too, this year is the 75th anniversary of a Victoria Cross recipient, Bill Newton, who was flying in the Southwest Pacific, and he was the only Victoria Cross recipient to the RAAF and the only Air Force Victoria Cross in the Southwest Pacific. And he was shot down eventually and captured by the Japanese and executed.
The WA Police Pipe Band, over half a century old, formed back in 1966. The band performs at about 240 community engagement events throughout WA. They sound sensational today.
I think it's worthwhile mentioning too the new Commissioner of Police, Chris Dawson, APM, till his first ANZAC Day with us this year, even though he's been in the police force since the 1970s. And also this year we'll see him wearing his great uncle's medals, Captain Frank Smith, who was awarded the Military Cross. He was with 11th Battalion on Gallipoli, and then was commissioned as an officer and went away again with the 51st Battalion on the Western Front, and was awarded the Military Cross, but was killed at Villers-Bretonneux.
Now this is the WA Police contingent, Wayne. Explain the blue berets for us.
Yes, well, look, they're the UN, and Steve, in fact, probably speaks more on that because Steve served in the United Nations.
Yes, the police have been involved in United Nations peacekeeping operations for many, many years. Cyprus, which is still ongoing from about the 1950s, so ongoing commitment. They've also served in places such as Cambodia, significant operations up in East Timor. So wherever there's a United Nations activity on, you'll find Australian uniformed police participating.
Nice work from one of the officers just then, leaning down to pick up one of the youngsters that dropped their Australian flag. Picked it up and made sure that it handed it back to the young man over the fence. Well done to him. This is the WA Fire and Emergency Services Concert Band. It was once known as the Perth Concert Band. It owes its origin to a group of ex-servicemen who reformed the 44th Battalion Band as a civilian band. The Prince of Wales visited Perth in 1920. We've got members aged from 15 to 75. And behind them, the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, Steve.
Yes, led by Station Officer Gary Cope, a veteran of 23 years service. And one of the flag bearers there is Station Officer Mick Dillon, with 29 years service. DFES was formed in 2012 to coordinate emergency services for a range of natural disasters and emergency incidents, and it's staffed by 1,600 permanent members and 27,000 volunteers, and covers 2.5 million square kilometres by land, sea and air.
Just like to mention on parade today with them is Elaine Airy, and she this year was just awarded her SES Long Service Medal, and congratulations to her. Importantly, her father, late father, was the Regimental Sergeant Major Frederick Airy Military Medal, who served with the British Army in World War I and was the RSM of the 2nd 4th Machine Gun Battalion in World War II, was captured at Singapore and became a prisoner of the Japanese.
And here we have the Department of Fire and Emergency Service Cadet Corps, which consists of about 2,000 cadets, 220 adult leaders and instructors, and they are in 45 units across the state, which consist of around about 15 to 20 members each.
So all part of the WA community, all doing wonderful service throughout the state.
It's the oldest Salvation Army band in WA now, the Perth Fortress Salvation Army Band. Maroon jackets, dark blue pants. Formed back in March of 1892 with just 8 young bandsmen there. That's not them on screen at the moment. These are the flags, both of Australia and New Zealand. And we also caught a glimpse of the RSL State Executive and the RSL led by Peter Aspinall, the president these days, who's taking his place on the dais. See also, I don't know, it's a scarf being worn by one of the flag bearers with all the Vietnam medal ribbons on it and so on, adding a bit of colour to the parade this year. And behind them is the World War I WA unit banners and Victoria Cross recipients, led by the Great War Living History Association, who do a wonderful job. Wes Olsen on parade with Bob Wise and Mike Bell, Sean Staples and Tess Wise. And the Jeeps coming right on now with the Veteran Car Club of WA Incorporated, carrying all our veterans who can't quite march this year. I'd like to mention, of course, that very sadly we have to acknowledge the passing of Anne Leach, OAM, and Florence Nightingale Medal, who was normally prominent in these vehicles in her World War II nurse's uniform and conspicuous in her red cape. And she passed away just short of her 103rd birthday last year. The flame lit earlier today from the Eternal Flame at Kings Park, leading the Jeeps, provided by the Veteran Car Club of WA.
That's right. Again, they do a wonderful job. We just saw the Model T Ford, which was something started by the late Jack McRoberts and is used regularly now in the parades. And some of the veterans there.
Yes, we've got Alex Newby in the Model T Ford, driven by driver Sean Carron.
You see the 2nd 16th names and RAF people amongst them. Dave Spikins, RAF Bomber Command, and Elizabeth Blanchett from the AWOS as well. And Steve Bennington and Bill Mason, RAN for Bill Mason. Barry Ether was there at A Squadron 10 Light Horse Days. Arthur Cross, Robert Horrocks will be down there. Padre Keith Moody, Royal Australian Armoured Corps man, quite a character, a bit of a legend within the Corps. Ken Knox will be there. Jack Serrano from the RAN, with Jack's 2 grandsons. Mark Blowers from 10 Light Horse Regiment. Bruce Cullen from the 35th Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. Graham Martin from 28 Battalion, that'll be the 13 Brigade one. Interesting one, the Z Special. Not marching as a unit this year, but someone being remembered there. And Ron Levitt and Ron's wife Lucy will be in the parade. Air Force man with his wings up, pilot's wings. So again, they give that wonderful opportunity, as will the hospital cars shortly following, to reveal, get the veterans out and about. Fleet Air Arm, a man there in the passenger seat.
Chance for a quick photo.
Yeah, it is, it's good, and the public sort of love this type of thing because the children can see right into the vehicles and allows, again, the veterans to be very much part of the parade. And Z Special will be thinking about Operation Jaywick, which has its 75th anniversary, an operation that left from Western Australia, Exmouth Gulf region, to attack Singapore successfully.
And in the Blitz truck, we see Bill Mason, 102 years of age, served with the 2nd 28 Battalion, is the oldest serving World War II vet in, correction, Bill Mason's World War II Naval, but we do have Bill Newell, 2nd 28 Battalion. Bill Mason was blown off his ship in the Atlantic there and suffered some serious injuries, but came back and fought another day.
Australian Army Catering Corps, Steve. You can't go anywhere without them. They're part of the, there's the teeth in the tail, and they're part of the tail, but without your tucker, you can't go too far.
Absolutely. Soldier likes a good feed.
So there he is, standing up next to the badge there.
So the cliche is true. The Army marches on its stomach.
Yes, pretty well. There's a couple of things you don't want to do without food, without pay, and sometimes without ammunition. That helps a bit. Veterans there with their World War II man in the passenger seat there, and a Vietnam veteran behind.
So that's Les Anderson there, as you mentioned.
Interesting way they cover their medals by their hand, because that comes out of the First World War final services around the cenotaph. And they're not covering their heart. They're actually saying, I'm covering my medals, whether I've got a Victoria Cross or Gallantry Awards, as I march past that cenotaph or memorial, my medals mean nothing. Your sacrifice means everything.
Wayne Gardner and Steve Danaher, military historians, explaining what means what here at the ANZAC Day Parade in 2018.
So the military and the military vehicles just finish off with the fire engine, which is an absolute cracker. Beautifully restored, as are all the vehicles, in fact.
It's the Dennis fire engine from memory.
Yes, that rings a bell.
There it is.
Yes, well done. And their superbly polished brass fire helmets, and he's wearing his campaign medals. I wouldn't think there'd be too many of those around. Special Air Service Regiment, SAS, with his distinctive sand beret.
Well, there we go, Ian Ramsey. Well done you, sir.
Good on you, Digger. So the veteran cars are on parade now, following the vehicles. And these, of course, carry all those people again who would normally be marching, but these days can't. A special mention to Tony Toad Fletcher, who to his family, because Tony passed away this year. He was Royal Australia Regiment and former manager of the Army Museum of WA. And also Colin Bartlett of 9 Battalion Royal Australia Regiment. So these hospital cars have been going for many, many years, and they provide all this wonderful service.
Just saw Kathleen Jennings there. OAM for services to the Red Cross. Going back in 1924. You shouldn't give away a lady's age, but
I think on this occasion,
yes, on this occasion you'd be allowed to.
So we've got Les Wern, and he trained in Canada to become a pilot. And Trevor Jones, Rob Horrocks. Peter was the Royal Australian Engineers from 1962 to 70. And served in Borneo and Vietnam. And Robert served in 28 WA West Australian Regiment, the battalion, and also 13 Field Squadron. There's Alex Kerr, a very well-known ex-serviceman in Western Australia, Professor Alex Kerr. He was shot down over Germany and became a POW, involved in 3 escape attempts and eventually escaped via a tunnel. Spent his 21st birthday in a camp, and a Canadian POW gave him an egg as a present, a rare treat, which I'm sure he hasn't forgotten about.
And of course, there's Bill Utting, who flew 36 bomber missions over Europe and received the Distinguished Flying Cross.
So one of our few decorated veterans left from that period now in World War II. And Mike Donnelly, an American captain in the US Navy, served 32 years. He's a ship's diver, and he was the former and last commander of the Exmouth base in WA. He married an Australian girl, Vicky, and he's been in WA since 1995, and his vehicle's driven by Graham McEwen, who's been driving for over 20 years, and he's a volunteer at the Army Museum of Western Australia.
The Veteran cars were first used going right back to the first ANZAC Day Parade of 1916, where 3 cars were used. We've seen as many as 38 cars used in the parade over the years, 3 wheelchair taxis, a number of buses as well, all driven by volunteers.
It's also good this year too, the names recorded on the side of the vehicles, which are useful to the crowd because no doubt there's family members present who can see it, and also those watching at home. So Nancy Dorrington, Nancy's wearing Jack Dorrington's medals, and Jack served in the 2nd 13th Field Ambulance in Egypt and New Guinea, and their son Terry has been driving the ANZAC Day Parade for over 20 years. Again, exactly what you said, Clint. A wonderful community effort that involves people who could normally never get into the parade.
Banners above the street, and the banners down below. So we start to see a number of them make their way down the terrace. This is the Town of Victoria Park brass band, or that was. A young man with an Everton shirt on, always good to see. The insignia of the 460 Bomber Squadron actually asked the Town of Victoria Park brass band a number of years ago to wear the insignia, as they were the closest to them when they marched, and ensured that it would always be seen in future ANZAC Day parades. The band itself formed in 1967 from the Victoria Park Citizens Band that was established in 1930, and the Southern Districts Youth Band amalgamated. They celebrated their 50th anniversary just last year.
So the ADF, the Australian Defence Force Service banner from 1990s, current there on parade with former service members marching behind that one. Should also mention too that the Australian Army Museum of WA is especially open today on ANZAC Day from 11 till 3, with the last entry at 1:30, and it's free entry to those visitors wearing medals. It's located at Historic Artillery Barracks in Burt Street, Fremantle. So if you have time to get down, please do. And you'll see the wonderful exhibitions and displays dating from a British settlement in 1826 right through to the recent conflict in Afghanistan. So our modern younger veterans marching behind the banner there. Not a small contingent there, but I imagine that's one that could easily grow over time. But there's a number of members who'd prefer to march with their individual units, whether it's Navy, Army or Air Force. Others who perhaps might be visiting from the eastern states or who live here and their units aren't represented would march in this particular group, I'm sure.
Absolutely. One of the challenges faced by the younger veterans is that the units are not state-based and therefore spread across the nation, and therefore we have a representative of various units, and therefore marching behind general banners such as the Naval Association of Australia.
You're quite correct, Steve. And on the right with the banner there, that's Julian Stein, the grandson of the Lieutenant Commander Leon Goldsworthy. George Cross, Distinguished Service Cross and George Medal, Australia's most highly decorated sailor. And I think his brother Chris might have been on parade as too this year as well.
The RANZ, the Royal Australian Navy Women's Association, again back in 1971, still has 10 members that were involved in World War II. Not of them, all of them marching today. A number of their members, as you would understand, now in their 90s, but a number still involved in the association, of course.
Okay, and the Fleet Air Arm Association of Australia WA Division was formed in February 1977, and one of the most famous members at the moment in EMU flight, which was helicopters, Winston James Distinguished Service Cross, and the HMAS Perth Association, this year led by Commander Robert Mummery, retired engineer officer, and Jim O'Neill won't be far away as well. And the HMAS Perth this year is also working towards a memorial to be hopefully placed down at Riverside Drive in East Fremantle. So there's lots to look forward to. Perth, a very famous ship indeed. HMAS Brisbane has served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam and the Gulf, and had the distinction of being the last Royal Australian Navy ship to have fired her guns in anger. So service there in also in Vietnam, of course, and they also helped with disaster relief. The Hobart Association, interestingly with the Hobart, 50 years ago in South Vietnam, this year in 1968, they were attacked by a US aircraft and suffered 2 killed and many wounded from that encounter. The HMAS Sydney Association wouldn't be far away, of course, the famous ship there in the Mediterranean, and also off the coast of WA. The Canberra Association and Shropshire Association, the Shropshire becoming known as the Lucky Ship. Both very famous ships from the Pacific area. Canberra being lost off the Guadalcanal in Savo Bay. Cadets doing a good job carrying the banners of those that don't have members who can do that, of course. They're doing a wonderful job throughout the day. Service reflected in Malaysia. The N-Class, the destroyers led by Ken Adams. And these are the N-Class Napier, Nizam, Nestor Norman and Nepal. Nestor being lost in action in the Mediterranean in 1942. Of course, the association with WA, the HMAS Nizam, in February 45 lost 10 of its members when they were washed overseas during a freak wave just 11 miles south of Cape Lewin, and that's a commemoration that's honoured annually in their memory. The Tribal Class destroyers, led by Graham Woodford and Jack Lacroix this year as well. And Jack OAM will be with his grandson and great-grandsons, and his daughter will also be one of the banner bearers today. So this is made up of the HMAS Bataan, a Tribal Class destroyer of the Royal Australian Navy. Served in World War II and it was present in Tokyo Bay at the Japanese surrender. HMAS Arunta, which like the Bataan saw service in Korea and Malaysia, and the Warramunga, which had service in Pacific and New Guinea, Leyte Gulf and Lingayen Gulf, also in Korea.
And just a brief mention of the Perth Metro Pipe Band there, formed in 2007, the drum major David Johnston.
And here we have the naval clearance divers.
It's a tough job, Steve.
It is, isn't it? They do very, very hard work. The Australian Clearance Diving Team 4 is led by Lieutenant Commander Ryan Post today. They've served in such places, or the CDTs, Vietnam, Gulf, Somalia, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan, and very, very heavily involved in IEDs, and we can see Team 4 members there at the moment.
They're followed by the Far Eastern Strategic Reserve.
Yes, and one of the they're also carrying the banner for HMAS Sydney 2, which is very important to them as a group, and they're carrying that today in honour of Tom Fisher, OAM, and George Ramsey, and the Ramsey family of 4 generations marching today.
They just walked by HMAS Sydney. We saw them there a little bit later than we expected.
And that will happen throughout the parade from time to time, but they certainly all get there eventually. And the Sydney, as we said before, had sunk the Italian ship Bartolome Colleoni in the Mediterranean, then came out into the Indian Ocean and Southwest Pacific. It was sadly lost off the coast of Western Australia in a battle against the Cormorant.
Sounds of the WA Brass, once known as the Royal Agricultural Society of WA Brass, WA's most successful community band.
So Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association WA branch, the red, green and brown, the mud, the blood and the green fields beyond as their banner, led by Colonel Ken Ashman, their patron, Dick Jones following, many members of 10th Light Horse, Dick Ray Lederer and Jeff Hard, Page and Pete Williams, they're often in those parades as well. John Evert, saw him down there. They represent the traditions of 10th Light Horse from the First War and the Second Wars. Also include some Ramey people as well. We have 3rd Cavalry Regiment on parade, a big year for them because during the Tet Offensive they were very heavily involved, particularly 3 Troop of A Squadron APCs at the Battle of Barria, led by West Australian Roger Tingley, who gained a military cross as a 2nd Lieutenant commanding that particular troop.
And here we have the Royal Australian Artillery, led by Brigadier Jerry Warner AM LVO. It looks like the Royal Australian Regiment marching as one group this year, and of course, you know, they've represented with 101, 102, 107 field batteries, 2nd, 7th and 2nd, 3rd Field Regiment Association, light and heavy anti-aircraft associations.
Well, if they're marching together too, of course, they'll be remembering Coral Balmoral with 101 and 102 batteries there, perhaps.
Absolutely, and 102 field battery served with distinction at 5 Support Base Coral. In fact, one of their guns was overrun, but before it was done so, the crew had disabled it, but they managed to get it back by the next morning. They suffered a number of casualties, and we've got some of those wounded soldiers marching with us today.
So that's 50th anniversary for that particular battery, and a very important time, Tet Offensive, which we will speak about later on as well.
Just want to make mention there of the Churchlands Senior High School band we saw going by a second ago. First march 2004.
And the Royal Australian Engineers Association, led by Ian Johnston, Jeff Simpson, and all the units are marching under the one banner. And yeah, they've served from the Boer War right through to today. Back in previous wars, it was all about field engineering and such, but today it's all about IEDs, improvised explosive devices and such, and engineered dogs. They have lost one member this year, and that's Jim Kimberley, that served with 17 construction and the training team in Vietnam.
Explain the axes we saw.
Okay, well, they're normally carried by the pioneer sergeant, and unusually in the Army, he's allowed to wear a beard, which the Navy can do, but the Army generally can't. So they carry the axe and the pickaxe as part of the traditions of the sappers of the British Army. So our infantry units are on parade today, 2nd 11th Battalion, honouring its traditions from the First War and the Second War.
And with the 2nd 11th Battalion today, we have Arthur Leggett. Well, actually, shall we head back to the Survey Corps? They were amalgamated with the Royal Australian Engineers back in 1996. And it was interesting, I was at School of Military Engineering at the time, and they came in, so I was, you know, the survey chaps were a little bit confused at what they were doing with engineers, but historically that's where they belong.
So continuing on with our infantry, 11th Battalion from the First War. You see their battle honours there with the A over their mud overseas, the brown and the blue, and the A indicating their ANZACs. They were the Gallipoli men.
And we see a lot of family members marching in representation there today. One chap who's not in attendance because he just couldn't make it. He turns 100 in September of this year, and that's Arthur Leggett, OAM. He was a founding member of the Cameron Highlanders of WA, joined 2nd 11 as a signalman at the request of Captain Raymond Sandover. He was a POW on Crete and is currently president of the ex-POW Association of Western Australia.
Graham Johnson down there, the beard and the hat, his father, Lieutenant Colonel KT Johnson, a very significant member of the 2nd 11th Battalion. And Graham, too, is a volunteer at the Army Museum of Western Australia at historic Artillery Barracks in Fremantle. And
coming into shot at the moment is the 2nd 16th Battalion. Of note, Cyril Allender was an original member of 16 Battalion, and there he is pushing his own wheelchair. Good on him. Well done, sir. He ended up serving with, we have Bill Graydon as well, leading the push, Bill Graydon AM. But the chap pushing the wheelchair is Cyril. He turns 99 in October. No wheelchair for me, he says. He served, and the 2nd 16th, as we can see there, Litani River, and that's all in Syria against the Vichy French. Ending up in New Guinea, Dakota Track, and some of the fiercest fighting they saw was on Shaggy Ridge.
It still has time to wave to the crowds that have turned out in big numbers, Cyril.
Yeah, Cyril's a sensational guy, and Bill Graydon still has a handshake like a vice, I can tell you. Wonderful people.
Perth.
It's the most important day in Australia, a day to bring people together to say thanks to those who served and to those who currently serve, to remember their sacrifice.